Flight journey from Sydney, Australia to Saigon, Vietnam. It's not too busy here today. Have a nice day, everyone. Have a great flight. Like. Please share for many people to see. Now let's look at the flight itinerary. Departing from Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, flying to Saigon, Vietnam. Flying from the southeast and south to the north and northwest of Australia. Fly over the Timor Sea and some countries such as East Timor, Indonesia, Brunei. And to Vietnam. Saigon is located in southern Vietnam. Hanoi is the capital of Vietnam. Oceania is a geographical region comprising Australasia, Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, spanning the eastern and western hemispheres. At the center of the water hemisphere, Oceania is estimated to have a land area of about 9 million square kilometers and a population of around 44.4 million as of 2022, when compared to the continents which it is often compared to, not including Australia. Oceania is the smallest in land area and the second least populated after Antarctica. Oceania has a diverse mix of economies from the highly developed and globally competitive financial markets of Australia, French Polynesia, Hawaii, New Caledonia, and New Zealand, which rank high in quality of life and human development index, to the much less developed economies of Kiribati, Papua New Guinea, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, and Western New Guinea, while also including medium-sized economies of Pacific islands such as Fiji, Palau, and Tonga. The largest and most populous country in Oceania is Australia, and the largest city is Sydney. Puncak Jaya in Highland Papua, Indonesia, is the highest peak in Oceania at 4,884 meters. is the capital city of the state of New South Wales and the most populous city in Australia. Located on Australia's east coast, the metropolis surrounds Sydney Harbour and extends about 80 kilometres from the Pacific Ocean in the east to the Blue Mountains in the west, and about 80 kilometres from the Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park and the Hawkesbury River in the north and northwest, to the Royal National Park and MacArthur in the south and southwest. Greater Sydney consists of 658 suburbs, spread across 33 local government areas. Residents of the city are colloquially known as Sydneysiders. The estimated population in June 2023 was 5,450,496, which is about 66% of the state's population. The city's nicknames include the Emerald City and the Harbour City. Aboriginal Australians have inhabited the Greater Sydney region for at least 30,000 years, and their engravings and cultural sites are common. The traditional custodians of the land on which modern Sydney stands are the clans of the Darug, Darawal and Eora peoples. During his first Pacific voyage in 1770, James Cook charted the eastern coast of Australia, making landfall at Botany Bay. In 1788, the first fleet of convicts, led by Arthur Phillip, founded Sydney as a British penal colony, the first European settlement in Australia. After World War II, Sydney experienced mass migration, and by 2021 over 40% of the population was born overseas. Foreign countries of birth with the greatest representation are mainland China, India, the United Kingdom, Vietnam and the Philippines. Despite being one of the most expensive cities in the world, Sydney frequently ranks in the top 10 most livable cities. It is classified as an alpha city by the Globalization and World Cities Research Network, indicating its influence in the region and throughout the world. Ranked 11th in the world for economic opportunity, Sydney has an advanced market economy with strengths in education, finance, manufacturing and tourism. The University of Sydney and the University of New South Wales are ranked equal 19th in the world. Sydney has hosted major international sporting events such as the 2000 Summer Olympics. The city is among the top 15 most visited, with millions of tourists coming each year to see the city's landmarks. The city has over 1 million ha-2, 500,000 acres of nature reserves and parks, and its notable natural features include Sydney Harbour and Royal National Park. The Sydney Harbour Bridge and the World Heritage-listed Sydney Opera House are major tourist attractions. Central Station is the hub of Sydney's suburban rail and light rail networks, with metro platforms under construction. The main passenger airport serving the city is Kingsford Smith Airport, one of the world's oldest continually operating airports. Australia, officially the Commonwealth of Australia, is a sovereign country comprising the mainland of the Australian continent, the island of Tasmania, and numerous smaller islands. Australia is the largest country by area in Oceania and the world's sixth largest country. Australia is the oldest, flattest, and driest inhabited continent, with the least fertile soils. It is a megadiverse country, and its size gives it a wide variety of landscapes and climates, with deserts in the center, tropical rainforests in the northeast, tropical savannas in the north, and mountain ranges in the southeast. The ancestors of Aboriginal Australians began arriving from Southeast Asia 50,000 to 65,000 years ago, during the last glacial period. They settled the continent and had formed approximately 250 distinct language groups by the time of European settlement, maintaining some of the longest known continuing artistic and religious traditions in the world. Australia's written history commenced with European maritime exploration. The Dutch were the first known Europeans to reach Australia in 1606. British colonization began in 1788 with the establishment of the penal colony of New South Wales. By the mid-19th century, most of the continent had been explored by European settlers and 5 additional self-governing British colonies were established, each gaining responsible government by 1890. The colonies federated in 1901, forming the Commonwealth of Australia. This continued a process of increasing autonomy from the United Kingdom, highlighted by the Statute of Westminster Adoption Act 1942, and culminating in the Australia Acts of 1986. The Blue Mountains are a mountainous region and a mountain range located in New South Wales, Australia. The region is considered to be part of the western outskirts of the Greater Sydney area. The region borders on Sydney's main metropolitan area, its foothills starting about 50 kilometres west of centre of the state capital, close to Penrith. The public's understanding of the extent of the Blue Mountains is varied, as it forms only part of an extensive mountainous area associated with the Great Dividing Range. As defined in 1970, the Blue Mountains region is bounded by the Nepean and Hawkesbury rivers in the east, the Cox's River and Lake Baragarang to the west and south, and the Wolgan and Colo rivers to the north. Geologically, it is situated in the central parts of the Sydney Basin. The Blue Mountains range comprises a range of mountains, plateau escarpments extending off the Great Dividing Range, about 4.8 kilometers northwest of Wolgan Gap in a generally southeasterly direction for about 96 kilometers, terminating at Emu Plains. For about 2/3 of its length, it is traversed by the Great Western Highway, the main Western Railway line and the soon-to-be-completed Blue Mountains Tunnel. Several established towns are situated on its heights, including Katoomba, Blackheath, Mount Victoria, and Springwood. The range forms the watershed between Cox's River to the south and the Grouse and Wolgan rivers to the north. The range contains the Explorer Range and the Bell Range. Once considered impassable by settlers, the 1813 expedition by Blaxland, Wentworth and Lawson opened up the interior to British settlement. Today, the Blue Mountains area includes the local government area of the City of Blue Mountains. Since the early 2010s, the region's biodiversity and infrastructure has been severely affected by massive bushfires of unprecedented size and impact. In 2018, 8.4 million people visited the Blue Mountains. The Blue Mountains and Southern Highlands basalt forests is a prominent forest community within the ecoregion. Following European settlement of the Sydney area, the area was named the Carmarthen and Lansdowne Hills by Arthur Phillip in 1788. The Carmarthen Hills were in the north of the region and the Lansdowne Hills were in the south. The name Blue Mountains, however, was preferred and is derived from the blue tinge the range takes on when viewed from a distance. The tinge is believed to be caused by Mie scattering, which occurs when incoming light with shorter wavelengths is preferentially scattered by particles within the atmosphere, imparting a blue-grayish color to any distant objects, including mountains and clouds. Volatile terpenoids emitted in large quantities by the abundant eucalyptus trees in the Blue Mountains may cause Mie scattering and thus the blue haze for which the mountains were named. Victoria, commonly abbreviated as Vic, is a state in southeastern Australia. It is the second smallest state, with a land area of 227,444 square kilometers. The second most populated state after New South Wales, with a population of over 6.7 million, and the most densely populated state in Australia, 29.5 per km². Victoria is bordered by New South Wales to the north and South Australia to the west and is bounded by the Bass Strait to the south, with the exception of a small land border with Tasmania located along Boundary Islet, the Great Australian Bight portion of the Southern Ocean to the southwest, and the Tasman Sea, a marginal sea of the South Pacific Ocean, to the southeast. The state encompasses a range of climates and geographical features from its temperate coastal and central regions to the Victorian Alps in the northeast and the semi-arid northwest. The majority of the Victorian population is concentrated in the central south area surrounding Port Phillip, and in particular within the metropolitan area of Greater Melbourne, Victoria's state capital and largest city, and also Australia's second largest city, where over 3/4 of the Victorian population live. The state is home to 4 of Australia's 20 largest cities: Melbourne, Geelong, Ballarat and Bendigo. The population is culturally diverse, with 35.1% of inhabitants being immigrants. Victoria is home to numerous Aboriginal groups, including the Boonwurrung, the Britawaling, the Djadjawurrung, the Gunai, the Gundamara, the Tongrung, the Wathaurong, the Wurundjeri, and the Yorta Yorta. There were more than 30 Aboriginal languages spoken in the area prior to European colonization. In 1770, James Cook named the east coast of the Australian continent for the Kingdom of Great Britain. The first European settlement in the area occurred in 1803 at Sullivan Bay. Much of what is now Victoria was included in 1836 in the Port Phillip district of New South Wales. Named in honour of Queen Victoria, Victoria was separated from New South Wales and established as a separate Crown colony in 1851, achieving responsible government in 1855. The Victorian gold rush in the 1850s and 1862 significantly increased Victoria's population and wealth. By the time of Australian Federation in 1901, Melbourne had become the largest city in Australasia and was the seat of federal government until Canberra became the national capital in 1927. The state continued to grow strongly through various periods of the 20th and early 21st centuries as a result of high levels of international and interstate migration. Victoria has 38 seats in the Australian House of Representatives and 12 seats in the Australian Senate. At state level, the Parliament of Victoria consists of the Legislative Assembly and the Legislative Council. The Labour Party, led by Jacinta Allen as Premier, has governed Victoria since 2014. The Governor of Victoria, the representative of the monarch in the state, is currently Margaret Gardner. Victoria is divided into 79 local government areas, as well as several unincorporated areas which the state administers directly. Victoria's economy is the second largest among Australian states and is highly diversified, with service sectors predominating. Melbourne hosts a number of museums, art galleries, and theatres, and in 2016, sports marketing company named it the world's sporting capital. Australia is a federal parliamentary constitutional monarchy comprising 6 states and 10 territories, the states of New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, Tasmania, South Australia and Western Australia, the major mainland Australian Capital Territory and Northern Territory, and other minor or external territories. Its population of nearly 27 million is highly urbanized and heavily concentrated on the eastern seaboard. Canberra is the nation's capital, while its most populous cities are Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide, which each possess a population of at least 1 million inhabitants. Australian governments have promoted multiculturalism since the 1970s. Australia is culturally diverse and has one of the highest foreign-born populations in the world. Its abundant natural resources and well-developed international trade relations are crucial to the country's economy, which generates its income from various sources, predominantly services including banking, real estate and international education as well as mining, manufacturing and agriculture. It ranks highly for quality of life, health, education, economic freedom, civil liberties and political rights. Australia has a highly developed market economy and one of the highest per capita incomes globally. It is a middle power and has the world's 13th highest military expenditure. It is a member of international groups including the United Nations, the G20, the OECD, the World Trade Organization, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the Pacific Islands Forum, the Pacific Community, the Commonwealth of Nations, and the Defense and Security Organizations ANZUS, AUKUS, and the Five Eyes. It is also a major non-NATO ally of the United States. The name Australia, pronounced Streli in Australian English, is derived from the Latin terra australis, southern land, a name used for a hypothetical continent in the southern hemisphere since ancient times. Several 16th century cartographers used the word Australia on maps, but not to identify modern Australia. When Europeans began visiting and mapping Australia in the 17th century, the name Terra Australis was applied to the new territories. Until the early 19th century, Australia was best known as New Holland, a name first applied by the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman in 1644 as New Holland and subsequently anglicized. Terra Australis still saw occasional usage, such as in scientific texts. The name Australia was popularized by the explorer Matthew Flinders, who said it was more agreeable to the ear, and an assimilation to the names of the other great portions of the earth. The first time that Australia appears to have been officially used was in April 1817, when Governor Lachlan Macquarie acknowledged the receipt of Flinders' charts of Australia from Lord Bathurst. In December 1817, Macquarie recommended to the Colonial Office that it be formally adopted. In 1824, the Admiralty agreed that the continent should be known officially by that name. The first official published use of the new name came with the publication in 1830 of the Australia Directory, I. The Hydrographic Office. Colloquial names for Australia include Oz, Straya and Down Under. Other epithets include the Great Southern Land, the Lucky Country, the Sunburnt Country, and the Wide Brown Land, the latter to both derive from Dorothea Mackellar's 1908 poem My Country. Surrounded by the Indian and Pacific Oceans, Australia is separated from Asia by the Arafura and Timor Seas, with the Coral Sea lying off the Queensland coast, and the Tasman Sea lying between Australia and New Zealand. The world's smallest continent and sixth largest country by total area, Australia, owing to its size and isolation, is often dubbed the island continent and is sometimes considered the world's largest island. Australia has 34,218 kilometers of coastline excluding all offshore islands, and claims an extensive exclusive economic zone of 8,148,250 square kilometers. This exclusive economic zone does not include the Australian Antarctic Territory. Mainland Australia lies between latitudes 9 and 40 for south, and longitudes 112 and 15 for east. Australia's size gives it a wide variety of landscapes, with tropical rainforests in the northeast, mountain ranges in the southeast, southwest and east, and desert in the center. The desert or semi-arid land, commonly known as the outback, makes up by far the largest portion of land. Australia is the driest inhabited continent. Its annual rainfall averaged over continental area is less than 500 millimeters. The population density is 3.4 inhabitants per square kilometer, although the large majority of the population lives along the temperate southeastern coastline. The population density exceeds 19,500 inhabitants per square kilometre in central Melbourne. In 2021, Australia had 10% of the global permanent meadows and pasture land. The Great Barrier Reef, the world's largest coral reef, lies a short distance off the northeast coast and extends for over 2,000 kilometers 1,200 miles. Mount Augustus, claimed to be the world's largest monolith, is located in Western Australia. At 2,228 meters 7,310 feet, Mount Kosciuszko is the highest mountain on the Australian mainland. Even taller are Mawson Peak at 2,745 meters 9,006 feet, on the remote Australian external territory of Heard Island, and in the Australian Antarctic Territory, Mount McGlintock and Mount Menzies, at 3,492 meters 11,457 ft and 3,355 meters 11,007 ft respectively. Eastern Australia is marked by the Great Dividing Range, which runs parallel to the coast of Queensland, New South Wales and much of Victoria. The name is not strictly accurate, because parts of the range consist of low hills, and the highlands are typically no more than 1,600 meters 5,200 ft in height. The coastal uplands and a belt of brigalow grasslands lie between the coast and the mountains, while inland of the Dividing Range are large areas of grassland and shrubland. These include the western plains of New South Wales, and the Mitchell Grass Downs and Mulga lands of inland Queensland. The northernmost point of the mainland is the tropical Cape York Peninsula. The landscapes of the top end and the Gulf country with their tropical climate include forest, woodland, wetland, grassland, rainforest and desert. At the northwest corner of the continent are the sandstone cliffs and gorges of the Kimberley, and below that the Pilbara. The Victoria Plains tropical savanna lies south of the Kimberley and Arnhem Land savannas, forming a transition between the coastal savannas and the interior deserts. At the heart of the country are the uplands of Central Australia. Prominent features of the centre and south include Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock, the famous sandstone monolith, and the inland Simpson, Tirari and Sturt Stony, Gibson, Great Sandy, Tanami, and Great Victoria deserts, with the famous Nullarbor Plain on the southern coast. The Western Australian mulga shrublands lie between the interior deserts and Mediterranean climate southwest Australia. Lying on the Indo-Australian plate, the mainland of Australia is the lowest and most primordial landmass on Earth with a relatively stable geological history. The landmass includes virtually all known rock types and from all geological time periods spanning over 3.8 billion years of the Earth's history. The Pilbara Craton is one of only two pristine Archean 3.6–2.7 billion years ago crusts identified on the Earth. Having been part of all major supercontinents, the Australian continent began to form after the breakup of Gondwana in the Permian, with the separation of the continental landmass from the African continent and Indian subcontinent. It separated from Antarctica over a prolonged period beginning in the Permian and continuing through to the Cretaceous. When the last glacial period ended in about 10,000 BC, rising sea levels formed Bass Strait, separating Tasmania from the mainland. Then between about 8,000 and 6,500 BC, the lowlands in the north were flooded by the sea, separating New Guinea, the Aru Islands, and the mainland of Australia. The Australian continent is moving toward Eurasia at the rate of 6 to 7 centimeters a year. The deserts of Australia or the Australian deserts cover about 2,700,000 square kilometers, or 18% of the Australian mainland, but about 35% of the Australian continent receives so little rain, it is practically desert. Collectively known as the Great Australian Desert, they are primarily distributed throughout the Western Plateau and interior lowlands of the country, covering areas from southwest Queensland, far west region of New South Wales, Sunraysia in Victoria and Spencer Gulf in South Australia to the Barkly Tableland in Northern Territory and the Kimberley region in Western Australia. By international standards, the Great Australian Desert receives relatively high rates of rainfall or around 250 mm 984 in on average, but due to the high evapotranspiration it would be correspondingly arid. No Australian weather stations situated in an arid region record less than 100 mm 394 in of average annual rainfall. The deserts in the interior and south lack any significant summer rains. The desert in Western Australia is well explained by the little evaporation of the cold sea current of the West Australian Current, of polar origin, which prevents significant rainfall in the interior of the continent. About 40% of Australia is covered by dunes. Australia is the driest inhabited continent, with the least fertile soils. In addition to being mostly uninhabited, the Great Australian Desert is diverse, where it consists of semi-desert grassy or mountainous landscapes, xeric shrubs, salt pans, gibber stony deserts, red sand dunes, sandstone mesas, rocky plains, open tree savannas and bushland with a few rivers and salt lakes, which are mostly seasonally dry and often have no outflow in the east. The 3 million square kilometers desert is among the least modified in the world. The Australian desert has the largest population of feral camels in the world. The Australian mainland's continental crust, excluding the thinned margins, has an average thickness of 38 kilometers, with a range in thickness from 24 kilometers to 59 kilometers. Australia's geology can be divided into several main sections, showcasing that the continent grew from west to east. The Archean cratonic shields found mostly in the west, Proterozoic fold belts in the center, and Phanerozoic sedimentary basins, metamorphic and igneous rocks in the east. The Australian mainland and Tasmania are situated in the middle of the tectonic plate and have no active volcanoes, but due to passing over the East Australia hotspot, recent volcanism has occurred during the Holocene in the newer volcanics province of Western Victoria and southeastern South Australia. Volcanism also occurs in the island of New Guinea, considered geologically as part of the Australian continent, and in the Australian external territory of Heard Island and McDonald Islands. Seismic activity in the Australian mainland and Tasmania is also low, with the greatest number of fatalities having occurred in the 1989 Newcastle earthquake. The climate of Australia is significantly influenced by ocean currents, including the Indian Ocean Dipole and the El Niño Southern Oscillation, which is correlated with periodic drought, and the seasonal tropical low-pressure system that produces cyclones in northern Australia. These factors cause rainfall to vary markedly from year to year. Much of the northern part of the country has a tropical, predominantly summer rainfall monsoon. The southwest corner of the country has a Mediterranean climate. The southeast ranges from oceanic Tasmania and coastal Victoria, a humid subtropical upper half of New South Wales, with the highlands featuring alpine and subpolar oceanic climates. The interior is arid to semi-arid. Driven by climate change, average temperatures have risen more than 1°C since 1960. Associated changes in rainfall patterns and climate extremes exacerbate existing issues such as drought and bushfires. 2019 was Australia's warmest recorded year, and the 2019 to 2020 bushfire season was the country's worst on record. Australia's greenhouse gas emissions per capita are among the highest in the world. Water restrictions are frequently in place in many regions and cities of Australia in response to chronic shortages due to urban population increases and localized drought. Throughout much of the continent, major flooding regularly follows extended periods of drought, flushing out inland river systems, overflowing dams, and inundating large inland floodplains, as occurred throughout eastern Australia in the early 2010s after the 2000s Australian drought. Subscribe me. Please share for many people to see.